2.5%. That is the share of all Americans who actually have $1 million sitting in their retirement accounts, confirmed by the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances. But there is a second number, 4.7%. And there is a third number that financial platforms love to parade in their press releases, 21.9%. All three of those statistics are real. All three describe the same country in the same year, in 2026. And the fact that they contradict each other by a factor of almost 9 is the most important retirement math story that almost nobody is explaining properly. Every single one of them comes from a different scoreboard. Most people are watching whichever one makes them feel the best. That is a very costly habit. I am going to walk you through all three numbers, explain precisely why they diverge, and then give you the number inside the number, which is the share of that 2.5% whose 1 million will actually outlast them. That final figure is where this conversation has to arrive, and it is where I want to begin. Here is the structure of the confusion. The 21.9% figure comes from Empower's platform data as of March 2026. Empower is tracking the users of its personal finance dashboard, people who are by definition financially engaged enough to have sought out and signed up for a tool like that. That is selection bias, the size of a skyscraper. The 4.7% comes from the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, which is a nationally representative survey, but it accounts only for Americans who actually have retirement accounts. And only about 54% of Americans have any retirement account at all. Apply 4.7% to 54% of the population, and you land right back at around 2.5% of all Americans. That is the real scoreboard, the one that counts every person in the room, not just the ones who bothered to show up to the financial literacy workshop. This is not a statistical technicality. The scoreboard you choose to read shapes your entire sense of whether you are falling behind, staying on track, or pulling ahead. If you absorb the message that roughly 2 in 10 financially engaged Americans are retirement millionaires, your subconscious quietly files that underachievable. People like me do this. If you internalize the actual number, 1 in 40 Americans, your urgency shifts, your timeline shifts. The decisions you make in the next 6 months shift. Same country, 9 times different number, 9 times different psychological outcome. I'm going to give you the full picture. Income stratification, the behavioral mechanisms, the distribution phase failures that destroy portfolios that survived the accumulation phase perfectly well, and the math of what $1 million actually produces as retirement income in 2026. None of it is designed to discourage you. All of it is designed to show you the real scoreboard, so you stop accidentally optimizing against someone else's game. In a few minutes, I am going to show you what $1 million actually generates in retirement income today, and the number is going to completely reset your mental model of what the benchmark even means. But first, let me finish the data layer, because it is considerably more sobering than the headline number suggests. Of the roughly 340 million Americans, Gallup estimates that about 6 in 10 have any type of formal retirement savings plan. That is already the first filter. 40% of the country is not saving for retirement through any structured vehicle at all. Of the 60% who are the responsible ones, the people who contribute, who capture the employer match, who let the account sit untouched through market corrections, only 4.7% of that group has crossed $1 million. That means if you placed 100 actively saving Americans in a room, you would get fewer than 5 who have reached 7 figures. The other 95 are going to retire on something that looks considerably different from what they were led to believe. Half of retirees aged 75 and older have less than $130,000 saved. Not $130,000 per year, $130,000 total. That is the median. That is the middle of the distribution for America's oldest retirees. And every financial product advertisement, every millionaire mindset video, every brokerage's quarterly report on record retirement balances exists in a world that is completely disconnected from that number. There is a woman I will call Diana. She worked at a mid-size manufacturing company in Ohio for 31 years, a solid career by any measure. She contributed consistently to her 401k, captured every dollar of her company's 50-cent match, up to 6% of her salary, reinvested dividends, and never once took a loan against the account. She retired at 64 with $280,000 saved. She did exactly what the poster on the break room wall told her to do for 3 decades straight, and she arrived at retirement with less than a third of the 1 million benchmark. She is not a failure story. She is the median. The system was never built to deliver Diana to $1 million. It was built to deliver her somewhere in the 200s. It worked exactly as designed. The system succeeded. The goal was always the problem. The issue is not discipline. Diana maximized what was available to her within her income band. High-income households typically save an average of $769,000 compared to $79,500 for middle-income households. That is a 10-to-1 ratio that compounds across an entire career. A typical college graduate has 3 times the median retirement savings of someone who earned a high school diploma but did not attend college. $141,700 versus $44,000. Homeowners average $33,000 more in retirement accounts than renters, more than 2.5 times as much. The $1 million club is not randomly distributed. It clusters around income, education, and asset ownership, which means the path to it is more predictable than retirement culture ever admits. But it also means that most of the structural factors are established long before the moment you decide to get serious about saving. You cannot fix a 10-to-1 income gap by contributing an extra 2%. Now, for a moment of levity, because sometimes the absurdity earns it. The average 401k plan in the United States offers somewhere between 10 and 30 fund options. Research on how people actually choose from those options is genuinely striking. A significant share of participants either select the fund with the most familiar name, divide contributions evenly across every available option regardless of overlap or cost, or simply leave the default selection untouched for years without ever revisiting it. There is a behavioral economics study in which researchers found that the sheer number of funds on a menu significantly reduced participation rates. More choices, less action. People look at 32 mutual fund options with subtly different names and do what brains do when overwhelmed. They pick the default and move on. The default in most plans is not the optimal choice. The default is whatever fund company paid to be placed in the default position. Stay with me, because this next section is not about accumulation math. It is the calculation that makes even people who do reach $1 million feel as though they have somehow missed. The cultural shorthand for having enough money to retire has been $1 million for so long that most people assume it originated from some rigorous actuarial analysis of what retirement actually costs. It did not. It became a round number cultural benchmark sometime in the 80s and 90s when $1 million was a legitimately significant sum. $1 million in 1980 is the equivalent of roughly $3.8 million in today's purchasing power, accounting for cumulative consumer price inflation. Consider what that means. The target never changed. The dollar grew substantially weaker. Nobody updated the scoreboard. The standard framework financial planners rely on is the 4% rule, developed in 1994 by William Bengen. Tested against 50 years of market return data, withdraw 4% of your portfolio in year 1 of retirement, then adjust upward for inflation each subsequent year. Historically, across those 5 decades of data, the money survived a 30-year retirement. 4% of $1 million is $40,000 per year. The average Social Security monthly check for retired workers reached $2,247.77 in March 2026. That translates to roughly $24,300 per year. Combined with the $40,000 generated by $1 million in savings, that is $64,300 in total annual retirement income. For many people, that sounds workable. But here's the critical caveat. Financial experts generally say that to maintain your lifestyle after you stop working full-time, you should aim to replace about 80% of your pre-retirement income. If your household was earning $80,000, you need $64,000 in retirement. $1 million gets you exactly there, as long as Social Security continues to keep pace with real inflation, as long as there is no major health disruption, and as long as the 4% rule holds across your specific retirement timeline. That last condition is precisely where the math quietly breaks down. Bengen's study assumed a 30-year retirement window. The median actual retirement age among middle-class retirees in their 60s is 62, earlier than most people plan for, and often driven by health issues or job loss rather than personal choice. A 35 or 40-year retirement window changes the calculus significantly. The 4% rule is not wrong. It is simply answering a slightly different question than the one most people are actually asking. There is a woman I will call Laura, a regional sales manager in her late 50s. She had $580,000 in her 401k and was 2 years from her self-defined target of $750,000. Her plan was to reach that number and then work 2 more years to 65. Her company restructured when she was 58. She was offered a severance package. She accepted it, fully confident that something comparable would materialize within a few months. It did not at the same income level. For 3 years, she managed the gap between what unemployment paid and what her life cost by drawing from savings she had never planned to touch. She claimed Social Security at 62, permanently locking in a benefit 30% lower than what she would have received at 67. She will receive that reduced amount for the rest of her life. Laura's story is not about bad planning. It is a well-constructed plan built for a straight road that encountered an unexpected curve. Her plan had a single point of failure: remaining employed in a specific role at a specific income level until a specific date. That is a structurally fragile retirement strategy, and it is also the dominant one. Here is something that never surfaces in a conventional retirement planning conversation. The distance between where the data shows most people, $185,000 at 55, $200,000 at 65, and where the math says they actually need to be, is a solvable problem. The information exists. 50 years of data exists. What is genuinely hard is that understanding the numbers intellectually and building a functioning system around them are 2 entirely different problems. Now let me talk about the layer beneath the math, because the math problems are all solvable once you can clearly see them. The behavioral problems are considerably trickier. The reason Diana saved $280,000 and not $800,000, even though the math of compound interest was available to her throughout her entire career, is not stupidity or laziness. It is a well-documented feature of human cognition called present bias, the demonstrated tendency to assign disproportionate weight to immediate costs over distant future rewards. Saving for retirement is structurally one of the most difficult things a human brain will voluntarily do, because the sacrifice is now. It is real, it is tangible. It is money that could be spent on something you can actually touch. And the reward is 30 years away, abstract and populated by a version of yourself that does not yet feel like a real person. The brain, which evolved to manage short-term threats and immediate resource allocation, is not naturally calibrated to optimize for the 65-year-old version of you. What this means in practice is that most people are not making rational wealth-building decisions. They are making emotional ones, and then constructing rational-sounding explanations after the fact. The savings rate feels about right, not because someone ran the income replacement math, but because it feels comfortable relative to current spending patterns. The fund selection feels reasonable because the name sounds familiar. The decision to get serious later feels prudent because there is always a legitimate short-term expense that seems more pressing right now. These are not character flaws. They are baseline human cognition operating exactly as it was designed. The financial industry is well aware of this, which is partly why auto-enrollment in retirement plans was such a meaningful policy development. When the default is enrolled, most people remain enrolled. When the default is that you have to actively opt in, far fewer people do. Defaults win, always. But the default in American retirement culture: contribute whatever feels comfortable, pick the familiar fund, don't touch it, trust that it will work out, produces a median retirement balance at 65 of around $200,000, which is less than a quarter of the 1 million benchmark that everyone has been told represents the starting point. There is a second layer to the psychological problem that does not receive nearly enough attention: social comparison. People benchmark their financial position against their visible peer group, not against the median American. If you are 45 and everyone in your social circle owns a home, drives a 3-year-old car, and takes 2 vacations per year, your savings rate will naturally calibrate against that peer group, even if the peer group as a whole is collectively underfunded for retirement. The fact that half of American households approaching retirement have under $185,000 does not register as personally relevant because it feels abstract and distant. The neighbor who just bought the lake house does register, concretely and immediately. And the lake house feels like evidence that everything is fine. Now let me run through the subplot that has been threading underneath everything I have been saying, because it resolves directly into the most important point I can make. As of March 2026, over 56.8 million retired workers and family members received monthly benefits from the Social Security Administration. The system was designed to replace around 40% of your pre-retirement earnings. It was never meant to be the whole plan. It was designed as the floor. And the floor at roughly $24,000 annually for the average recipient is low enough that almost anyone relying on it as their primary income source will find themselves in a difficult position. The gap between what Social Security provides and what a reasonable retirement income actually requires is the structural hole that personal savings are supposed to fill. But the median retired household has about $200,000 in savings, generating $8,000 per year at a 4% withdrawal rate. Add Social Security, and you arrive at $32,000 annually. That is the actual income picture for the median American retiree in 2026. Now, for one specific and concrete scenario, because vagueness is exactly where false comfort lives. Take a couple. Call them Mike and Karen, both 65. Mike worked in IT management for a regional firm for 26 years. Karen spent 28 years in healthcare administration. Together, they have $350,000 in retirement accounts, meaningfully above the median, which already makes them a relative success story within the data. They own their home outright, with about $200,000 in equity. Mike's Social Security benefit is $2,200 per month. Karen's is $1,500. Combined, that is $43,200 per year from Social Security. At a 4% withdrawal from their $350,000, they draw $14,000 per year. Total annual income, $57,200. Run the expenses honestly. Property taxes, homeowners insurance, and maintenance on a paid-off house, $8,000 per year. Groceries and dining, $10,000. Healthcare costs, inflation, and daily living expenses for a couple in their mid-60s run $12,000 to $15,000 annually before any major health event. Let us use $12,000 for the conservative estimate. Transportation, utilities, internet, phone, $8,000. That is $38,000 in fixed annual costs. Mike and Karen have $19,200 remaining for everything else. Travel, clothing, gifts, home repairs, the car that will eventually need replacing, whether they have budgeted for it or not, and any financial emergency that arises. Is it survivable? Yes. Is it the retirement that was implied by 30 years of generic retirement savings messaging? Absolutely not. And they are above median. They are in better shape than most of the country. They are not struggling, but they are budgeting carefully. There is no cushion. There is no year where either of them says, "Let us do Europe this summer," without it feeling like a genuine trade-off. Now, consider what happens to the math if either of them experiences a significant health event at 72. Nursing home care in the United States averages well over $100,000 per year. Home health aid services can run $60,000 annually. Medicare does not cover long-term care. Medicaid only becomes available after assets are essentially depleted. The $350,000 in retirement accounts is gone in 3 to 4 years. The home equity follows. Mike and Karen, who genuinely did everything right within the system they were handed, are asset depleted at 76. That is not an edge case. That is a realistic probability event embedded in the American retirement landscape for anyone relying on savings at the median level. The question financial media keeps asking, how many Americans have $1 million, is actually the wrong question. The right question is, how many of those people will still have the majority of it 20 years into retirement? After sequence of returns risk? After tax drag on required minimum distributions? After a healthcare system that does not stop billing simply because you have run out of principal? About 3/5 of Americans are afraid they will outlive their savings. That fear is not irrational. It is a reasonable response to the underlying math. Sequence of returns risk alone deserves its own deep examination. But here is the compressed version. Suppose you retire at 62 with $1 million. In year 1, the market drops 30%. Your portfolio falls to $700,000. You still need $40,000 to cover your living expenses. You withdraw $40,000 from $700,000. Now you have $660,000. the market fully recovers in year 2. A 43% gain. 660,000 multiplied by 1.43 equals $943,000. You are not back to $1 million, and you have spent 2 full years of withdrawals on top of the loss. The sequence of returns, specifically a bad sequence in the first few years of retirement, can permanently impair a portfolio that would have survived the exact same average returns delivered in a different order. Timing matters in ways that accumulation phase thinking almost never prepares people for. Here is the perspective that reframes the entire conversation about the 2.5%. $1 million in 2026 is not a finish line. It is a starting position. It produces roughly $64,000 annually in retirement income when combined with an average Social Security benefit, which is enough to live on, but not enough to absorb unexpected costs, not enough to leave a meaningful buffer for the 35-year retirement that actually awaits someone who retires at 62. The goal that became cultural shorthand in the 1980s, that has never been updated for inflation, that is being reported selectively through platforms surveying their most financially engaged users, is doing enormous psychological work that the underlying math simply does not support. Northwestern Mutual found that on average, Americans believe they will need $1.26 million in savings to retire comfortably, even though most of them seem to recognize they are unlikely to reach that target. They have raised the goal in their minds. They just have not raised the savings rate to match. According to a 2024 report from the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College, an estimated 39% of working households are projected to fall short of maintaining their pre-retirement standard of living. Not the bottom quartile. Working households. People who had careers, contributed something, owned homes, and still arrive at the exit with a gap that the math cannot close at 4% withdrawal. The people in the 2.5% did not get there by finding the right hot sector, the right advisor, or the right market timing. The average time it takes to build $1 million retirement account is about 27 years, according to a Fidelity analysis of its account holders. 27 years of contributing consistently, of not touching it during market corrections, of keeping fees low enough that compounding can actually do its work. That is not a secret strategy. It is what happens when you ignore the wrong scoreboard for long enough that the right one has time to grow. You think the problem is that people simply do not save enough, that income is the gap, and the gap is the entire story. Income is certainly a factor. The data on high-income versus middle-income households makes that structurally clear. But income is not the primary mechanism of failure. For the people who are earning reasonable money and still arriving at 65 with less than they need, and this is a large group, the problem is not the savings rate. The problem is that the savings system itself has invisible leaks built directly into its architecture. Here is exactly what I mean. You are contributing to your 401k every year. You are invested in a moderately diversified, actively managed mutual fund. You have a financial advisor charging the industry standard fee of 1% of assets under management annually. Over 20 years on a $500,000 portfolio growing at 7% gross. That 1% advisory fee costs you approximately $330,000 in lost compounding. That is not a number that appears on any fee statement you will ever receive. It is compounding that never happens. $330,000 that would have been quietly working inside your account, building on itself year after year, is silently redirected into a fee structure you signed onto on a form 12 years ago and have not thought about since. Most of the million-dollar retirement accounts that exist today were built from surprisingly modest beginnings. What separates them from the accounts that stagnate and stop growing is not luck. It is fee structure and time. Low-cost index funds, the unglamorous ones with expense ratios between 0.03 and 0.2% annually, do not make for compelling financial product advertising. They are not exciting. They are not a compelling story. They are, however, mathematically devastating to high-fee alternatives over a 20-year window. The compounding math on a 1% annual fee difference starting at $500,000 is $330,000 over 20 years. That is not a minor optimization. That is a second portfolio that either exists or does not exist based on a single decision you probably made without fully running the numbers. And here is the additional sting. Decades of data from S&P's annual scorecard on actively managed funds shows that between 80 and 90% of active managers underperform their passive benchmark index over any 10-year rolling period. So the investor paying 1% per year is on average paying for a service that historically produces worse results than the alternative. They are paying a premium for underperformance. The industry understands this data perfectly well. The incentive structure of the industry is not aligned with your account balance. It is aligned with the fee stream. Fee streams are predictable. Fee streams compound for the advisor regardless of market performance. Your account balance does not. There is a comedic moment of honesty warranted here. I once sat next to a financial advisor at a dinner party who spent roughly 20 minutes explaining with genuine conviction why index funds were oversimplified and why active management added value that the data simply failed to capture. He drove a considerably nicer car than I did at the time. I pay a combined expense ratio of roughly 0.04% across my holdings. We have each made our choices. Now I want to address something more fundamental, because the math problems are all solvable once you can see them clearly. The reason Diana saved $280,000 rather than $800,000, even though the math of compound interest was accessible to her throughout her entire working life, has nothing to do with intelligence or work ethic. It is a well-documented feature of human cognition, and it shapes decisions across the entire economic spectrum, which is why the accumulation gap is so consistent and so predictable. The savings system has one more invisible flaw worth naming: the distribution phase. Most retirement planning content, most advice, most benchmark setting, and most cultural messaging about the $1 million goal is entirely focused on accumulation. Save this much, invest this way, reach this number. The distribution phase, which is what actually happens when you begin withdrawing from the account you spent decades building, operates under an entirely different set of rules. And the rules of the distribution phase will quietly dismantle a portfolio that survived the accumulation phase without a scratch. The sequence of returns problem is a distribution phase problem. Tax drag on required minimum distributions is a distribution phase problem. Healthcare cost inflation, which consistently outpaces general consumer price inflation, is a distribution phase problem. None of these appear in the math when you are staring at a compound interest calculator at age 42 and feeling genuinely optimistic about the trajectory of your balance. They materialize when the account transitions from a thing you are filling to a thing you are drawing from. Research on actual retiree spending patterns consistently shows that spending is not a flat line. It tends to be higher in early retirement when people are healthier and more mobile, declines in the middle years, and then spikes late, primarily driven by healthcare costs. A withdrawal schedule that reflects that actual spending curve, rather than a fixed linear assumption, preserves portfolio longevity in ways the standard 4% rule framework does not account for. Your withdrawal strategy should know the difference between a 62-year-old retiree with 35 years ahead of her and a 72-year-old with a shorter expected horizon. Most default plans do not. 3 practical takeaways, and I'm going to be specific about each one because the generic advice is precisely what delivered the median American to $200,000 at retirement age. First, build your personal income replacement target rather than chasing the cultural one. Go to ssa.gov, create an account or log in, and pull your Social Security statement. It takes under 5 minutes. Write down your projected monthly benefit at 67 and at 70. Take 80% of your current gross household income. Subtract your projected Social Security benefit at 67. That remaining annual gap divided by 0.04 is your actual portfolio target. For some people, it will be $800,000. For others, it will be $1.6 million. But it will be a real number attached to your real income, not a round number that became culturally sticky 40 years ago when a dollar was worth 3 times what it is today. Second, calculate the exact cost of your current fund fees right now, not at some point in the future. Log into your 401k or brokerage account. Locate the expense ratio on every fund you hold and add your advisor fee if applicable. Run a compounding calculator with your current balance, a 7% gross return, and your current total fee load. Then run it again at 0.05%, the approximate expense ratio of a basic S&P 500 index fund. The difference between those 2 outputs compounded over 20 years is a number worth seeing in a spreadsheet well before you see it reflected in a retirement account that is smaller than it should have been. Fee arithmetic is not complicated. It is just rarely presented in a way that prompts anyone to act on it. Third, build a liquid buffer outside of your retirement accounts before you actually need it. Not inside a 401k, not in a traditional IRA, but in a brokerage account or high-yield savings account holding 12 to 24 months of living expenses. The documented pattern of workers being pushed out of the workforce in their mid to late 50s does not allow time to construct that buffer after the fact. You have to build it while income is still flowing. When the unexpected transition arrives, and for a substantial share of people it will arrive, a liquid buffer is the difference between a forced early Social Security claim and a strategic one. Waiting to claim Social Security from 67 to 70 increases your monthly benefit by 8% per year, guaranteed, backed by the federal government. That is the safest compounding rate available to any retiree. Protect your ability to wait for it. Patient, low-cost investing has built more lasting financial security than any speculative approach. The 2.5% did not arrive there by being smarter or luckier. They found the real scoreboard early enough that the math had time to do its work. The wrong scoreboard is still running on every financial media platform, every quarterly brokerage press release, every dashboard built to show engaged users a comfortable version of the data. It is a reassuring number. It is also someone else's.